All right, we're calling this meeting to order. And Jackie, was the agenda posted as it should be?
Yes, it was.
Great. We have the Brown Act declaration.
We have to vote on that.
Okay. We're going to be doing this every meeting, Jackie, on a
Well,
go-forward basis or what?
I'm not sure if we do it every meeting, but we haven't met for 30 days, for over 30 days. So I know we have to do it at this meeting.
Okay. Anyone like to move approval?
So moved.
Second.
That was Cruikshank, and the second was,
Philip.
okay, great. Thanks. Dave?
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any changes to the agenda, Jackie?
No, I have some comments on the consent calendar, but no changes to the agenda.
Great. Any public comments? Anyone here to wishing to address?
No public comments were submitted.
Okay, moving on to consent. You want to make
Okay.
yeah, go ahead, please.
Right, on the consent calendar, there was a miscommunication and we never did receive the audit. We're expecting it. So I want to remove that from the consent calendar because we don't have it. And the second thing is on D, which is the Silver Nest contract, there is still an outstanding issue that we're discussing with our attorneys. So I would like the approval contingent upon attorney approval.
Okay. Noted. Are there any other requests to pull anything off consent? Doesn't look like it. All right. Someone like to move approval based on Jackie's comments?
Moved. Philip.
Thank you. We have a
Second.
That was Britt. Is that Britt?
Yes.
Yes. Thanks. Thanks, Britt. Okay, Dave?
And any opposition to approving the consent calendar? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, presentations, Jackie.
Okay, we're very, very, I think, honored to have Dr. Tom O'Brien here today. He's the Executive Director of the Center for International Trade and Transportation at the California State University at Long Beach. He's also the Deputy Director of MetTrans, which is a transportation consortium partnership of Long Beach State and University of Southern California. I could read all of the things. He's members of executive committees of the University Transportation Centers. He's been the president of that. He's worked for the Federal Highway Administration. He's just an expert in the issues he's going to be talking about tonight, which are supply chain automation and intermodal freight. He has formerly worked for, was an Eno and Eisenhower Transportation Fellow. But what he didn't put on his bio, which was very upsetting to me, is that he used to be a contractor for the COG. So all of the things you hear tonight are because he got his foundation with us. So we're delighted to welcome back one of our COG success stories, Tom O'Brien. Tom?
Thanks, Jackie. And yeah, I'm very proud of my time spent at the COG. The problem is, like your college alumni magazines, where the older you get, the further back in the list of activities you are. Unfortunately, the COG stuff now seems a long time ago, but it really was foundational. The work that I was able to do with some of the friendly faces and squares on this meeting, including Wally, I see, and I continue to work with Steve Lance, though. Steve sits on our policy and steering committee, so the connections are constant and really valuable to us. I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. What I was asked to talk about today is, what everyone is talking about. Maybe he's even tired of talking about, and that's the supply chain disruptions we've all been experiencing, particularly those of us who live and work in Southern California, and those of you in the South Bay in particular. But I wanted to take a few minutes and sort of talk about what's been happening to resolve some of the issues, both in the short term, but in the longer term as well. Our center, the Center for International Trade and Transportation, is a research and education center based at Cal State Long Beach, but we do a lot of work at the intersection of industry and government. And so because of that, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development asked us to sort of use our convening power and our forum power to bring together a lot of the stakeholders together and to look at not just workshopping, but getting people in a room, making sure that we kept them honest and we left the room with some agreement on possible solutions to the challenges that we've been experiencing. And I wanted to sort of walk you through what we did starting last fall and where things are today. This was a project that was driven by the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, more affectionately known as GoBiz, with the support of the Port of Long Beach, CalSTA, and then Secretary Kim. And then as we moved forward, there was an interest in sort of looking at some unique supply chains within the state. And we had a second version of this convening that involved the Port of Oakland and the California Department of Food and Agriculture, looking at the unique challenges of the agricultural supply chain. So this was a largely Southern California focused activity in the beginning because the problems are most acute here, but recognizing that what happens here affects the rest of the state. Let me start by saying, just sort of foregrounding this, that I think the untold story of the pandemic and the supply chain is actually what worked. A lot more worked well than I think the supply chain gets credit for. The amazing volume of cargo, the unprecedented demand really put so much pressure on the supply chain. And yes, we didn't get goods next day or same day when we were expecting them. There are significant delays on certain things like automobiles and appliances, but the demand that we placed on the system to get goods to our house during the pandemic generally worked. And I think one of the things you're going to be seeing in this is that there was a general consensus that the supply chain had to work together in ways that they wouldn't before to be able to make sure that the goods could move and that labor was available. Still problems, but I want to foreground it because I don't think the news is all bad. So what was the initiative of the purpose? We were asked to move beyond the identification of problems and issues. Everybody was talking about the problems last summer. We were asked to sort of move beyond that, acknowledge them, and focus on solutions. And to engage in solutions-based dialogues across a wide spectrum of stakeholders, including the consumer to the people who move the goods. We were looking to build consensus on short and long-term solutions and establish bridge to other efforts, particularly those that were happening at the federal level. All of a sudden, there was this tremendous interest on the part of US DOT to become supply chain focused. And we saw that as an opportunity. The key questions that the initiative asked, sort of to focus everybody around the table, was what can we do better that adds value to the supply chain? We didn't want people finger pointing. We wanted to look at what adds value, what role can I play in making the situation better? We wanted to better define success, right? So that individuals and companies, organizations and government understood where the end game was in the short term and the long term, what the obstacles were in preventing us all from getting there. What were the risks of doing nothing, which I think for a while was on the table as an option. And then we asked seriously what the appropriate role for government was given the new level of interest. And I think the focus initially was on state government and federal government, but for those of you in local government, this is just as important a question, which is I'll talk about a bit at the end. The components included a social media campaign where we solicited information from people who just had something to say, who maybe had an out-of-the-box solution. We wanted to curate those. We created a discussion guide that's linked here live that sort of sets the stage, provides some context for some of the reasons why California is front and center in this debate. We did a virtual workshop that was open to everyone, where we workshopped some of the solutions organized around a set of topics. We had an in-person invitation-only summit, invitations coming from the governor's office to get the right people in the room from all of the sectors. And then we followed it up with an agricultural technical working group to sort of dig deeper into one of the issues that came about, which was the lack of access to key equipment for ag exports, and the dramatic impact on Northern California, the ag sector and the ports by the blockages and the delays here in Southern California, because it was impacting the overall vessel strings that would serve Oakland as well, ultimately. Talk about that in a minute. For the general workshop, this virtual one, we looked at a key set of subtopics that came out of the social media campaign and some pre-workshop focus groups. We asked what could be done to make intermodal systems more efficient. We asked about improving supply chain visibility, because one of the things that the supply chain has been observing is a significant challenge in getting accurate information when cargo is handed off from stakeholder to stakeholder. We wanted to focus on short-term strategies that would allow the supply chain to respond to rapidly changing demand. And what can government partners at all levels do to facilitate the efficient and sustainable flow of goods? What are some of the things that came out? Clearly, there was a hunger for solutions that recognize the systems approach to a supply chain. Very often, the funding that we get, the solutions that we get are modal specific, geographic specific, and don't take into account the unintended consequences of the actions of one stakeholder on another, like the ports on warehousing and distribution or trucking. The best term I think that came out of this for me was that we were looking at an orchestra without a conductor, and it didn't sound very nice. Better integration of multiple systems and different stages of the supply chain. This is clearly what became very evident was information on delays on the ocean carriage side getting to the people who were waiting for that vessel to get there. Better information on when it was going to arrive. There was a lot of talk about data integration for a system-wide approach, and the need for agencies to work together. This is not going to be news to you. There was a recognition that the longer term solution included a digitalization of the supply chain information. And there are a number of efforts at the individual port level to digitize information in a way that it's useful to all stakeholders. And there is a new effort at the federal level to sort of take a leading role in making this happen. One of the problems we have is that individual ports buy into legacy systems that then create challenges downstream and in creating incentives to merge information and create winners and losers when it comes to the platforms that are used for information sharing. There is an amazing lack of data standardization. And considering how many different stages of the supply chain have vastly different models and data capabilities, we have no real good measurements of fluidity that has to be addressed. And because we have some big, highly capitalized players and some very small, less capitalized player, the need to modernize systems was critical, because you can't do wide-scale data standardization and digitalization if all parties can't take part equally. There's a fair amount of discussion on workforce development, which you've heard a lot about. How do we get more, how do we get more people into trucks, more interested in trucking? What's the issue? Warehouse capacity is constrained by both space and workforce. And are we ready for the solutions, if they're technology driven, to have the workforce ready to assist in solving the problem? And what's the role of government in resolving those challenges, the workforce challenges? There was a lot that came out of the discussion on industry government coordination, and there was a general agreement that there was real lack of coordination at the state level in Sacramento to work with industry on a regular basis, so that these issues can be addressed in times that are not crisis driven. And particularly when it comes to government's role in funding, how do we have the priorities and the projects in place from a freight perspective, so that they're ready to be part of the mix in other major transportation and infrastructure funding opportunities when they're available. There really is a challenge in this country in setting freight policy. We have 50 different state freight policies. They often compete with each other and they often attract the same type of business. The Gulf Coast ports and the East Coast ports are looking to take our container cargo, our market share. And I think one of the positives that's come out of this is the federal government's recognition of, hey, the supply chain is a national economic competitiveness issue for us, both when it works and when it doesn't. All of this fed into the in-person summit that we had with the key stakeholders. And based on what we heard in the workshop, we sort of looked at the notion of how do we get to a 24/7 supply chain? If there's a systems approach we're looking at, we can't have some players working 24/7 and others working more traditional work environments. And if they're not working 24/7, what are the constraints? So we asked, where do we already have 24-hour operations? What are the opportunities to work collaboratively that get us closer to 24-hour supply chain, that spread out the peaks and valleys? And what role could the state play in facilitating the solutions? The outcomes, and you'll get these so you can read these, so I wanted to put more information on. But the real outcomes were about capacity and utilization. One of the things that was an interesting outcome of the discussion was they realized that because there was so much congestion, you would expect there would be a lot of port activity, but there was a lot of downtime because there was a lot of cargo sitting. And that created opportunities to use cranes for training. One of the key bottlenecks in the workforce are trained crane operators at the ports. So we had an agreement leaving the room that participants would coordinate crane availability to be used for training purposes when not being used for cargo handling. And that was a very specific outcome. You've heard a lot about hours of operation. The summit did reveal a consensus that maybe the focus shouldn't be on 24/7, but something like a more efficient 16/5. That would allow more hours when they made sense. There was an announcement soon after the summit where the Port of Long Beach announced its pilot plan with TTI to extend gate hours. But for reasons that I'm happy to talk about, they weren't entirely successful, partly because a 24-hour port or terminal that feeds into an 8-hour-a-day warehousing or distribution system that doesn't have enough trucks or chassis isn't going to be the solution. It's part of the solution, but more has to happen. There was a discussion about the need for buffer zones to address capacity shortages for storage. And so there have been pop-up staging areas for containers. I know those of you in the South Bay and also your partners in the gateway cities have been seeing some of this to some dismay, I imagine. But this has been one of the solutions that has not only been talked about, but implemented in certain places. And then the data sharing piece that I talked about to eliminate blind handoffs. One of the other key pieces that came out of this that has seen some traction is the development of somebody at the state level, an independent appointed policy director for freight to help manage policy issues and be a point person. If you are a mover of freight, you have to navigate CARB, the Energy Commission, Caltrans, regional government, all of which have planning functions and plans that aren't always entirely well harmonized, as you may know. And so that while some of this, as a wish list would include probably statutory regulations or statutory changes at the state level, but there has been action at putting together a short-term industry council to address the current issues now, but also moving forward. And then there were other solutions emerged that related to sort of, the impact of wages and salary minimums and thresholds on the workforce bottlenecks, fixing and coordinating different appointment systems across the ports and the terminals. And there has been some activity there as well. On the agricultural side, and I'll begin to close here, the real focus was on asset management for off-port storage containers. And I share this with you, even though it may not be a principal concern, because it's a telling story about how complex the supply chain is. One of the pushes has been, well, let's decongest the ports by moving activity outside of the port, whether it's container handling, staging, loading and unloading. But for our state's agricultural sector, they need access to food grade containers and fumigation inspectors. And the further out you go, the more challenging it becomes to decongest operations outside of the port. So the needs we heard from the specialized focus group on agriculture was a lot about, hey, Southern California, please get your acting together, or at least let us know how much the delays in the system are gonna impact us. And also, how can we work with government to increase inspections, get short-term offsite, but close to port storage locations. And then let me close this because I know we're getting, I mentioned the recommendations. When are we out of this and what does it mean for the South Bay? And this is my final slide. First of all, I think the good news is, you know, I was quoted in the newspaper saying that I thought the worst was behind us, and it was a truncated quote, but I will still stand by it. Only because there is attention to solving problems like I have never seen before, a willingness to compromise in certain key areas, and an attention from key levels of government, all levels of government, that shine a light on the problem, but also the role that that freight plays in national competitiveness, and the challenge and opportunities it presents to the communities through which it moves. So that's why you're seeing, I think, a positive attention paid to workforce opportunities, as well as mitigating the negative impacts. What that means is I see an increased demand and a willingness for more and better coordinated freight planning between regional governments and the state government. The freight mobility plan, the sustainable freight action plan, the regional plans that LA Metro are doing. SCAG has a freight impact study underway. SANDAG has a sustainable freight strategy implementation study underway. All of these are really good and valuable efforts. I think the benefit to what will make them most effective is the attention that's given to how they relate to these other broader efforts at the state and national level. The other thing I think that's important for local and regional government is what role can you play and how can you benefit from what I see as a willingness, at least in baby step terms, for the private sector to begin to share information on what moves when and how, so that local governments can plan better, but that also the supply chain is more fluid. One of the things that has constantly amazed me in the whatever 20 plus years I've done this is how we don't have good information on the de jure and de facto truck routes that trucks take through our communities and on the roads, and what good information that's contained in one jurisdiction stops at the border. And having that information and knowing where trucks go and where they park along the side of the road to meet hours of service regulations would be helpful to all parties involved. And then I think there's going to continue to be land use issues surrounding the last mile and the battle for the curb. I don't often see discussion of loading and unloading issues in complete streets plans. And get that, but I also think that acknowledging what we've seen during the pandemic and what it means for demand for that shared space at the curb is going to have to be addressed to make sure that we plan to eliminate the conflicts between pedestrian serving uses, bike uses, street dining, and the goods and services that support all of those uses. So let me stop there. I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the time we have left.
Thank you, Tom. Tom, you mind showing, closing your PowerPoint? Great, thank you. All right, appreciate that. Any questions? And we've got one, let's see, we'll go to Olivia, then John, and then George.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive presentation. But my question is, where do we go from here? You've raised some excellent issues for us to consider. What opportunities do we have now to meet again to talk about what specific steps that we can all take?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, before the pandemic, there were a couple of key forums that existed. One, CalMitSAC, which died, I think, in untimely death as a body, that was enacted in state legislation as a forum to address these issues, to identify projects for prioritization. That in some ways has been replaced by the California Freight Advisory Committee, the CFAC. But often I think that's one-way dialogue between the state and industry. What I think we learned from this experience is our opportunities for both larger bodies for dialogue and also smaller committee level, topic level discussions that involve government, regulatory agencies, and the operators of the freight system. So one of the things I do see coming out of this, and particularly if the state continues to move forward with an industry council or a point person at the state level, is you will have opportunities for ongoing dialogue. And I think the more active local government is in the discussions around freight, you know your issues better with regard to warehousing and trucking than many others. And I know that those conversations occur in lots of places. But a way to sort of add those up at the regional level. And I know the COG, the COG has done great work. And I think the COG can play a useful role in creating sub-regional level opportunities for dialogue as well.
Okay, John, and then we'll go to George and then Barry.
Thank you, Drew. So Tom, great seeing you. As always, I really enjoyed the information you got. And I know you're always in the thick of things. And so that was a great update. I guess the question, of course, I represent Rancho Palos Verdes and my office is in San Pedro. So I'm kind of right there with a front window seat watching the port every day. And, to me, at the beginning, when you said adding value, I think to a lot of the people in the South Bay and certainly our residents, making sure that traffic is not as crazy as it is certainly on the 710, which after the wonderful bridge opened, it was almost immediate that you couldn't use the bridge because the 710 freeway was jammed with trucks. And I guess the question to you, Tom, is when is enough? Like, when is it that they finally say we can't take any more imports in, and Long Beach and LA just say enough's enough, this hotel is full, and we because it always seems like they're always aggressively trying to do more and break records every year. And I guess the question is, could we ever think about more or capping how many we bring in and actually look at ways to produce more goods in the United States so we don't have to import so much?
Yeah, I mean, and certainly you are seeing a renewed emphasis on reshoring in certain key sectors. And I imagine that, there will be action at the national level to ensure that we never fall short of PPE and other equipments that are now deemed vital and necessary. And there will be incentives to make sure those are produced locally or domestically. The issue of caps on cargo is somewhat, I think it's something of a challenge, because how do you decide what's the upper level number, when in fact you probably could have operational changes that minimize the impact, right? You have larger ports that move more goods, that are more efficient, and probably in some cases have more impact than poorly run operations. The market tends to solve some of this problem. In 2005, right, we had some similar rises in volumes, and what ended up happening was Seattle Tacoma took some of our business for a while. We lost some to the East Coast and to Houston, and some of that never came back. There are, shippers looked at diversifying the ports that they used. The problem we're experiencing right now is, and I do think this is shorter term, John, you can't go to any other place. They're having the same congestion problems and a lack of equipment problems. They're just not as prominent or as acute. People are looking, major shippers are doing their own charter services. We've got sweeper vessels coming in to take the empties. People are looking at, can we bring in containers into Wainimi? But those are short-term solutions. And I think that is a unique circumstance. So I think one of the things that will maybe adjust the scale a little bit is, I think at some point, we're going to see a law of diminishing returns on the vessel sizes. One of the reasons we have so much cargo is we can handle the bigger vessels. But one of the things that the pandemic revealed is that there are inefficiencies that are imposed on the land side by larger vessels, and the ocean carriers, I'll be honest, don't care as much because they don't bear the burden. It's on the land side. This time they're suffering some of the consequences, and I think that may instigate some change as well.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Tom. All right, George, and then Barry.
All right, thank you, Drew. Tom, thank you for the presentation. Somehow, when I thought the reason this item came on the agenda is probably, I don't know what's coincidental, around the time of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about getting supply chain ready to, really get all the, I'll call the vaccine rolled out and all the, all the medical equipment. In my mind, the whole supply chain seemed to be, when the pandemic hit, all the toilet paper and the sanitizers went off the shelf. And in your typical, my head is manufacturing, you got to do things like you produce just enough, just in time. You don't want so much stock on shelves that's not, I guess, efficient. And then the pandemic and the human nature kind of, wrecked that model and threw the supply chain off. And then in my simple-minded way, look, it could be some of the government and public health policy that exacerbated the whole supply chain issue. And in your discussion, talk about a lot more what I call, if FedEx or UPS took over this, they probably knew exactly what to do. But it seemed like you didn't talk about, is there any relation with the public policy that caused the so-called supply chain issue? And is it just US or is that international as well?
No, it's global. I mean, public policy sort of a lack of having a national freight plan, I think, put us in a worse position. But a couple of things, and you raised some good points. One is the shortages, in my mind, they weren't a supply chain issue. What we did is we shifted the inventory from the store shelf to our basements, and that was panic buying. That wasn't a supply chain issue. The product was there and was available. We just responded and panicked. So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is there's some really interesting public policy bright spots that come out of this that at least give us lessons to move forward. One of the problems with the supply chain issues is that we have multiple supply chains. And so all of the goods that were destined for schools and theaters and institutional uses that couldn't use the goods, right, couldn't easily find an outlet on a commercial shelf, right? Partly because, for example, labeling requirements. There are different requirements for labeling, different standards, whether it's going for an institutional use or for commercial use. Well, the Food and Drug Administration relaxed some of those standards, which allowed food products not to go to waste, right? So public policy, I think everybody found a nimbleness they didn't know they had before. And that's sort of, I raise that because I think that's sort of the untold story of all of this. In the discussion about what went wrong, I'm sort of focusing on what went right.
And that's a very simple. If there was no pandemic, will we have the supply chain issue?
No, what it did though, it accelerated changes that we were already going to have to deal with. The other big problem is we're demanding goods in unprecedented volumes that they be shipped to our home. That shift to e-commerce was already underway. The pandemic made it worse and sooner.
Okay, we're gonna go to Barry and then that'll be it, because we're a little bit over in time.
Thank you, Tom. You have been a font of wisdom on transportation issues for the COG for a number of years that I will not say because it will make us both feel as old as we actually are. But anyway, I wanted to say or ask, of these various issues that we've been discussing, what of these are short-term versus long-term issues? And how does that change our approach to them?
So the long-term issue is the digitization, standardization of data. That's a longer-term prospect. There are certain things that can happen. We can get more drivers in trucks to move more goods by getting 18-year-olds in the cabs instead of 21. That's being piloted now. There are certain states that allow it for intrastate movement of goods. There's a federal effort to allow that to happen in some cases in interstate commerce. That's a short-term solution. Better organization and management of chassis. We have an inefficient chassis system which keeps them stored on the terminals and not out on the road where they should be. So that's a short-term solution, for example.
Thanks.
Tom,
Thanks
thanks.
again, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Yep, thank you both, Tom. Good sign when you get so many questions. Appreciate your time.
Thanks. And I'll text Jackie, I'll text yours in the put yours in the box.
All right, next up, South Bay Sustainability Report by our own Wally Simbab.
Right. Well, Wally is going to, once again, he's going to do what Tom did to some extent. He's going to have a dense slideshow. And I hope that you'll take time to go back and read Tom's and read Wally's, because that's really interesting information. Wally? Do we have Wally? Are you there?
Sorry, I'm muted. You snooze, you lose. Okay, well, 2021, can you hear me now? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, 2021 was a significant year for climate activities. And we believe that it's important to share the gravity of the situation with all of you. And I want to warn you, this is going to be sobering. But we can't really longer, I think we all felt we can no longer ignore this as the dynamic we're describing here as should affect policy. So David, you want to go on the next slide?
Natalie that's doing the slides.
Natalie, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead. You're going to have to tell Natalie to move forward.
I just did. Oh, okay. No, go back. Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, Natalie, go back. Yeah, so I thought it would be really useful if we started with what exactly is driving climate change. I know I learned a lot just by looking at this. So just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, Natalie, go on. Sorry, next one. So this is a graphic, one of the few graphics in this whole presentation, sadly. But on the left side, you can see how things normally work. The sun heats up the planet, and then the planet, through various means, reflects the heat back out into space. That's the way it's supposed to work. The soil absorbs some heat, and the water absorbs some heat, and that's how we can regulate the temperature of the Earth. Well, so when you start burning, that's on the right now, you start burning fossilized plants and animals, they release carbon and methane, and those are chemicals that go in and form a kind of a cover over the Earth. And it's a funny kind of thing. And then it lets the sun and the light and the heat through, but it traps the reflected heat that's supposed to be going back out. And so that's how we get climate change. Global warming is because there's a cover over the earth that's holding the heat in that comes from the fossil fuels. Okay, Natalie, next. So this is the text that I just really said. There's a couple of things on here I just want to highlight. That this carbon is going to be in the atmosphere for anywhere from hundreds to thousands of years. And that it hasn't been this high for 2 million years. And I just threw in that the Neanderthals were 200,000 years ago to point out that all of humanity evolved in the period of more stable climate, more stable heat. And so we're going to get hot, turbulent, and unstable. That's what's happening. Go ahead, next slide. So this is just to have a graphic. It's the idea is to say, here's a heat source and here's a blanket. And the way it's been for all these years is the blanket stays off. We throw the blanket over the heat source and it traps the heat and everything gets hotter. Okay, next slide. So we're going to be talking about the urgency of this. And I want to point out that this has been going on, the dialogue has been going on since at least 1900. The big change was when the NASA scientists testified in Congress in 1988 that we were facing a lot of trouble and that we should be addressing the carbon problem right then. And the discussion around that was, had that advice been taken, then carbon could have been priced reasonably. It could have been, the marketplace would have taken care of it because we could have made carbon more expensive and the alternatives would have become more feasible and we wouldn't be in this mess today. The big outcome from that testimony was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And if you look down at the bottom, they have now made 6 reports. They report every roughly 5 to 6 years, 7 years on reporting to society about what the status of climate and warming is. So the last one was the 2021, the IPCC report, and I'll touch on that briefly a little later on because it's one of the big events of 2021. Okay, next slide. So let's just quickly review what we all know, but let's review this. Next slide. So what we know is that these events are becoming more extreme, they last longer, and they're more frequent. And we all see this with our own eyes. Fire, smoke, droughts, floods, mudslides, heat waves, freezing, torrential rain. Species are going extinct. I understand we've lost about 8% of the species on Earth through this recent warming events. Death Valley record heat. The one that I kind of can't hardly imagine was the 25 inches of rain in Southeast Washington over a 24-hour period. If you can picture sheets of rain that would come down an inch an hour and then exceed it for 24 hours, it's amazing. Also, you all read the Amtrak and the cars on the interstate in West Virginia that got stranded in the snowstorm for 24 hours. These are pretty dramatic events, and there's dozens, there's hundreds of these really. This is just to recall your memory about what's going on. Overall, NOAA says we're experiencing $145 billion a year. And the thing is, we can't go back. It is what it is for the next, hundreds to thousands of years. Okay, next slide. So the thing that I really think is important for us all to get our arms around is that there is such a thing called a tipping point. That you see that all the time on the news and in print. It's uncontrollable chain reactions. They're vicious cycles. And it basically is at some point, even if we stopped generating any carbon whatsoever, that the heat that has been retained will create heat on its own. We become our own furnace. So forests are carbon sinks, and so they store carbon. That's one of the ways that climate has always been regulated, is forests can absorb carbon and whatever it is that it happens naturally. But as the heat causes drought, the forests dry out, and then the fires start, and then those forests burn, and they release this carbon. So the carbon sink becomes a carbon source. And that's what we mean by the vicious cycle. It just will go on its own. A big one is the permafrost, which I've got a little graphic in a sec. But as the heat increases, the permafrost melts and it stores methane, which is even worse. It's a worse fossil fuel than carbon dioxide. And I didn't throw it in, but I have a photo taken from a PBS special of the methane stored in ice, in which some scientists released it and they burned it, they lit it. So you could see there really is methane and it burns and it's stored in the ice. And so as we start, as that keeps going, as the heat keeps melting, then the methane keeps getting released. Also, sea ice, as we know, anything white, snow, ice, it reflects the heat. But as it melts, then it will just the water will, the sea, the lakes, the oceans will absorb the heat. So there's at least a dozen or 15 of these self-perpetuating cycles. And these are just a couple of them. And this is the danger, is once we get to a certain spot, which I think most scientists think is around 2 degrees centigrade heating, then we've kicked off these self-perpetuating cycles, and there's nothing we can do to control the increasing climate turbulence. Okay, next slide. So here's the little graphic. As you can see, the temperature increases, the ground warms up, the permafrost melts, you get more carbon, you get more heat. Okay, next slide. So Jackie and David and I thought it would be useful. I think maybe it's not useful, but to look at, make it personal. This isn't just it's happening and it's outside your house and you don't care. We did some sort of age sort of thing. Now, fortunately, if you're my age, none of this really matters because we're too old. But any age you are is going to be a problem. One of the things that's in the middle sort of bullet, the climate shifting like this is going to create food shortages. I was just on a website with peanut butter, coffee, salmon, wine, maple syrup, mussels, bananas, all kinds of things are going to be either gone entirely or very, very scarce. They're looking at 50% production decrease. So now the other thing is this is a term out of the literature: nasty, brutish, and short. If you know anyone in your family, that if you have a grandchild yourself, or nephews or nieces are having children and they're born about now, they'll be 50 to 70 in 2090, and the literature says their life will be nasty, brutish, and short. So next slide. So what was the policy response that tries to get its arms around this? Next. So we said the IPCC report, which is the 6th in a row, and they've each become a little more shrill because nothing is happening because of them. No one is paying close attention and doing something of it. So words taken from those reports are environmental suicide and code red for humanity. Again, these are not mine, they're direct quotes from the report. Then there's the Conference of Parties, the so-called COPs. COPs 26 was just in Glasgow. And one of the things they did was reconvene everyone who was at the Paris COPs. And everyone confessed that at the time that they did the Paris meeting, that the nations of the world agreed to try to limit heating to 1.5 to 1.7 degrees centigrade. They discovered in Glasgow that those commitments are really not being made. So the chances of going above 1.5, 1.7 to 2 are extremely scary at this moment. And whatever they did in Glasgow would not of no consequence. And so the takeaway from that set of meetings was we're out of time. And to give you a sense of the metrics of what we're talking about, you can see there the growth of billion tons of carbon dioxide annually from 50 to 90 to today. And business as usual is going to result in 51.5 billion tons. And in order to keep the temperature below 1.5, we need to cut that down to 12.5 billion tons by 2030, which is where the urgency comes in. That's the out of time is what it's talking about. And again, 2 degrees may set off these uncontrollable cycles. 3 will make life nearly impossible, and 5, the planet becomes uninhabitable. Next. So here's some possible scenarios that we want to quickly look at here. Next. Here's stuff we want to avoid. Armed conflict over food and water. This stuff has all been predicted in the literature. And The Department of Defense, for example, has gone on record that they consider global warming to be a threat to national security. Long periods of instability and chaos. There's going to be tens of millions of migrants that many of them will stay within their nation, just moving away from the coast. But there's something like 50 million of them are expected to be crossing international borders somewhere, ours only being one. Again, I mentioned deforestation that's a carbon sink. And so when you cut forests down for housing or whatever the use may be, that you're actually turning that sink into a source. High tides, of course, I read the other day that Manhattan Beach has a dune restoration project that'll probably be required of most coastal cities. Jet stream, extreme heat makes it so you can't work outside, and it drains the earth of its vitality, which is one of the reasons why the goods I mentioned don't have a particularly good future if this continues. And the current arc is going to be over 3 degrees, at which point in 2100, which is why I said the future of children born today does not look good if we don't get a handle on this. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so there are some things that we need to do, of course. This is broad brush, high level, but reduce the vehicle inventory. In the South Bay alone, we need to replace 200,000 cars by some sort of EV. And we're, as you know, working on local use vehicles that are small and cheap. And the capital cost of replacing those 200,000 cars would be huge if we don't cheapen off the options. Solar roofs, solar panels everywhere. Municipal fleet should be all electric. Anything that's built, we should be asking the developer to come up at least with a plan and an infrastructure that supports zero emission mobility options. There should be universal telework. We hope the state will incentivize large employers. So these are the kinds of basic scenarios that we're trying to look at as we go forward. Next slide. So now it's more specifically here in the South Bay. Next slide. So there's what we know, of course, is this is all well known. We have to stop burning gasoline and diesel and any fossil fuels for transportation by electrifying the fleet. We have to move to electric drive. But we also have to stop burning fossil fuels to generate electricity, which of course is one of those, getting back to those vicious cycles, is that as there's more droughts, then the hydroelectric goes away, and we can't use that clean energy, which makes the whole situation worse. So we got to transition to renewable, but also back in the transportation realm, we have to reduce demand for electricity by more walking, more cycling, and the small battery local use vehicles that we're trying to promote. This is extremely important to just cut down on electricity use and electrify the fleet. So the barriers are really not anything to do with money or technology. They're about leadership acting in a timely manner, which is one of the reasons why Jackie and David and I thought it would be very important to talk to you about leadership and doing things urgently. Business as usual, we deal with this all the time. I can't tell you the state bureaucracies that we have to deal with. They're all in silos. They don't really connect with each other, and they take forever to do what they're doing. And what they're doing often isn't very useful. Look at HCD as a case in point. And pretty much all these agencies are unwilling to innovate. I can't tell you the number of times we've been told on a grant application, we didn't fund you because, well, this has never been done before. Which is laughable if it weren't so serious. Okay, next slide. So here we are. What can you do? There are two really big takeaways here. One is everything you do in terms of policy and programs and so forth, you should be asking what it is that this project will do to add carbon or reduce carbon. And we've got to have dollars spent have to be reducing carbon. So refer you to a couple of things. You have a climate action plan that you've all adopted, and it should be in some state of implementation. You might ask your staff what that state is and explain to you what the commitments are that have yet to be made. Here's I've listed the table of contents there. And then of course the COG itself has its own climate action plan, and it was used more or less as a menu that your staff chose to they ignored some of our recommendations and they chose others to form your own climate action plan. So that's one thing. See what you're already committed to and how it's going. The other one is you have a magic machine, and that is called the South Bay Fiber Network. And this is the key tool going forward. And we're trying to get it extended to commercial districts and residential neighborhoods, the South Bay Access Centers, which I will explain at another time. But the big thing is new institutional practices, so that the vision here would be 90% of all traffic into the future consists of small battery local use vehicles and bicycles, quadcycles, tricycles, and so forth. So as you think about this, no more business as usual. There is no time for business as usual. If this was 1988, yeah, maybe so. It's not. So let your imagination run wild. Think of what you've never done. Think of things that you might think are crazy, and let's see if we can do them with that broadband network that the South Bay uniquely has in all of Southern California, not all of California, basically. Some things, the Terraces Mall on Western, John Cruikshank and I have talked about doing something with space in that mall for distance education classrooms or multi-government service centers. Or your city council chambers sit idle a lot. It could be a local resource for people coming in for large classes from B City Health District or ARC or something like that. Remote workforce, we got to keep as many people close to home as possible and not force them to commute in. And of course, we are trying to build the local use vehicle ecosystem. And so that includes more than the travel network, but the parking and public education. And I will say, part of this is state institutions, so there's no finger pointing here, but just for your information, we're trying to put some paint on the ground with the local travel network. And we've been at it since the first day I met with Metro to discuss Jacob Lee asked me what I wanted money for sustainability. And I told him this, it's been 7 years since that conversation. We don't have paint on the ground. And the only thing I will share about that is that the federal government had the Manhattan Project. They designed and built an atomic bomb in 4 years. So this gets a little ridiculous given the urgent situation. Okay, next slide. That's it, questions. And if you don't have any, the next slide is a question. I'll pose one myself. But let's hope you have some questions.
Thanks, Wally. I think we're all digesting the sobering news. Anyone have a question for Wally?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. I think this was very helpful to kind of give us a little tutorial on what exactly this all means. I'm particularly concerned just to refer to the most recent incident that we were involved in and sending our letter to the PUC about their proposal on solar. And I feel like, our state has made great strides by providing these incentives, and then they turn around trying to shoot themselves in the foot. And I feel like, this presentation would be so great to get out to so many of these state leaders to just get them to really focus on the reality of what's going down here.
Yeah, I agree with you on the solar. I don't understand it myself. I don't understand SB 9 and 10. I don't understand the solar stuff. I don't understand anything the state is doing. So they're part of the problem, to tell you the truth.
Okay, any other, we got, go to Olivia and then David.
Thank you, Mayor. Wally, thank you very much for that presentation. I was listening specifically to what we could do as cities. And one of the things you said was review your city's climate action plan. What do you suggest we do in reviewing it? What are we looking to do?
You're looking to see what you've committed to, because that was council adopted. And then you're looking at the progress, because the operant term here is you're out of time. And so how's it going? Are you, is anybody monitoring what you're doing and what the carbon reductions are? So get familiar with what you're supposed to be doing. Oh, yes, Jackie, we've got a smart fellow doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Kim wants to speak to this. Your climate action plan, every city's climate action plan has action steps in it. And we have baseline inventories that we've been doing for your cities for every couple of years. We're doing baseline inventories again. And Kim, do you want to say what Olivia will find if she goes to look and what we're doing about that?
Yeah, your climate action plan not only has strategies that your city has adopted, but it also has goals and targets and projections on how you can meet those targets. And the Climate Action Fellow is looking at your first target, which is 2020, to reduce your emissions to meet the state goals, which is that's listed in your plan. And so we're doing that greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the cities right now, so that you'll have a good look at where you are. She's looking at 2020 and 2019 because 2020 is an odd year, right? So that work is underway.
Mr. Chair, David has his hand up because we've been talking about really, Wally said you got to think out of the box. So David has some ideas of thinking out of the box. And I don't know if you need,
So some of the things that we were talking about that kind of sound, I'll start at the low end. Some of them might be possible is, for example, for Caltrans, when there's a grant application that you got a notice of a grant application. By the time you're awarded, if you're awarded it, to the notice to proceed, that could take a year or more. And we just don't have time for that anymore. We should try and shorten those kinds of windows so that by the time you get your funding awarded, you can turn around and get started on that climate change project kind of the next day almost. It could be something like aligning incentives with climate goals. So gas tax and vehicle miles traveled initiatives. The big kind of crazy one would be something like Metro suspending their planning for these rail big infrastructure projects that are 10, 20, 30 years down the road and temporarily divert funds to build something that's achievable, like a high-speed broadband network like we were able to do in 2 years. Or even the e-bike rebate program that was approved in 2020, that won't be rolled out until for people to actually apply to until late 2022. So it took 2 years to incentivize people to buy e-bikes that could easily replace some cars. And so it's those kinds of things that kind of sound crazy, but are the business as usual that we really don't have time to do anymore that we hope people start talking about. So we'll just leave it there for you guys to think about. But
thank you, David. Really helpful. Hildy, and then that'll be the last question because we are behind.
Thank you. And thank you, Wally. This is, we need to constantly be reminded. I was very motivated by the slide that had just the bullet points of the things that we can be doing in our cities. And one of the things that you noted on there was to include solar in your own city facilities. And I've been asking for that. I've been asking for an inventory of that. And as we are improving on our buildings, to include solar, both with private investment and in our government facilities. And I keep getting back the same comment, which is it's not cost effective. It's too expensive right now. So I'm wondering, is there anything that you can help us with? I can't do that research. I don't even know where to start. And if I'm getting that kind of answer back from staff, I don't know where to go with that, but we would probably all have that same motivation and that same issue in our cities. Is there something that can be done for all of our cities to understand what's available and how we can be improving our solar capacity on our city facilities?
Well, my first reaction is that's a COG question. I think Jackie and Ken would need to look at what a group buy would do. In other words, if the volume goes up, usually the unit price goes down. But to me, the other question is, I just have to smile when someone says to you that it's not cost effective. When you're faced with 2 degrees of warming and life as you know it is over, I'm having a hard time grasping what it is that cost effective means in that situation. And of course, the state is part of the problem. They should be putting money in your pocket to go do that. But in a more practical sense, I think the COG could take a look at doing a group purchase if every city was in, because it is a joint powers authority. I mean, that's sort of one of its powers, is to go out and pool money and put it everywhere. And I would highly recommend. I think it's a great idea.
It is a great idea. We have an energy management group, and maybe Kim can discuss with the energy managers of the cities how we can look into doing something like that. If there's interest.
And I would just add, there is actually a resource for some of our cities, for our cities that are considered in disadvantaged or pollution disadvantaged areas. There is a resource, SoCal REN, to do the planning for solar, as well as financial analysis and looking at incentives. Unfortunately, there's not these resources, I think, for all of our cities, but you can definitely look into that and talk to our facility people.
I think we can, you know, if you were thinking out of the box, we could, if we could bring out a consortium of cities together, we could go to our state legislators and say, use the surplus. We'll put in, cities will put in half the cost, and the state should put in half the cost. I mean, you know, we have to think of these things. So we'll look at it.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for taking it seriously.
Okay, just a quick note, having just put solar on my, we have an R2 building, so on the front and the back house, we've had solar installed for 6 months and we're still not able to get plugged into the grid. So I can tell you from personal experience that there's a lot of friction with the utility companies right now, a lot.
That's amazing.
Anyway, thank you very much for that. Let's see, we are on to, so Mayor Butts couldn't make it, right, Jackie?
He can't, David had tried for almost a half an hour to work with him. He can't seem to get on. So we're going to work with him in the next month. We'll try to figure out what's going on in Inglewood.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Department of Public Health SPA 8 update, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's Lindsay Lastra.
Lindsay, thank you for being here.
Of course, my pleasure. Sorry, I was waiting for my computer to come on. Can you hear me okay? I'm just making sure I have two things going on here. Great. Okay, wonderful. I know we're behind, although I think we're caught up a little bit now.
I think we're caught up. Yeah.
Okay, great. I was going to try to go really quick, but I'll still try to keep us moving. So essentially, we wanted to, as we always do, provide some updates. Right now, of course, nothing is a surprise, but COVID resurging, our numbers have gone up. And so we wanted to just really kind of focus a little bit on there, just because we really do need support from everyone, just to kind of remind folks what things we want you all to do. We also want to share some data as far as where cities in SPA 8 are kind of have the higher numbers, and hopefully we can try to maintain our community spread. So first, I just wanted to also just kind of point out a key kind of piece of data is we are seeing about 1 in 6 people that do have COVID. So it's just, you know, it's something that puts us like in the perspective of how rampant it is in our community. And although the numbers are going down, we still are seeing increases in hospitalizations and death. And so again, it's you know, a lot of people are vaccinated, but a lot of people are not. And so it's just this ongoing effort that we're trying to do. So Nancy, if you can go to the next slide, thanks. We wanted to focus on this slide just to show how the variant has changed, right? Delta was the main thing at the beginning. We saw that pretty much throughout, well, it was all of last year. And then about really December, we started seeing the shift from Delta over to Omicron, and now Omicron is pretty much 99% of our cases. And so we continue to learn as the variants change about how people are reacting, how they get sick. A lot of people who are vaccinated have become sick with the Omicron variant. But the nice thing is that we're seeing is that they are not ending up most of the time, yeah, they're not ending up in the hospital or having any serious complications. So we continue to hone in on that. The vaccine and the booster is still very much the protective factor here to get all of our community members vaccinated. Go to the next slide, Nancy. Thank you. On this slide, we want to show the trend. So if you look, it's basically from December through, basically the month of December through January 11th. And really, if you see the shading, the dark green is where we had the highest percentage in the communities, at 20% of within the community of having COVID. And so we've seen a shift throughout the time frame. And so we really want to focus on this is how the widespread community, how the community spread has likely reflected the increase in transmission among those people whose jobs has put them most in contact with COVID folks, people who are sick. And then also those who live in crowded housing. And so we see it have really spread, and we're seeing in particular in spot 8, if we look down towards the middle where we have the most densely populated communities living together, having the most COVID. So again, we continue to emphasize the social distancing, masking, and hand washing. And of course, if you're feeling sick, to stay home. Next slide, Nancy. This slide is really hard to see. So you will all have these slides, but this slide we wanted to just hone in on our spot 8 cities so that you can basically see how our numbers have shifted from, I think it's January, sorry, I'm looking at it also, January 14th and January 21st. So we have these 14-day case and death rates. And so we saw that there was actually a slight decrease in our cities, and some of the cities having cases. But what we do see though, we still do see cities that have gone up or haven't dropped down as below. And so, for example, the first cities highlighted here, Carson, the ones in red are Carson, Inglewood, and Torrance. They had actually the highest numbers on the 14th. They did go down, but they still continue to be high numbers now, or as of the 21st. In addition to those 3, as of the 21st, Wilmington's numbers also continue to be really high up. So it's more about knowing the spread in your community, also kind of just making sure that residents are getting those messages about, you know, vaccination opportunities, masking, social distances. I know masking is becoming also challenging, but it's, you know, it is one of our protective strategies. And so we will continue to share that with folks as a key strategy for all of us. You can find this data on our website, and we will send a link on the slide when you all receive it. Next slide, Nancy. As I was saying, we have updated our masking requirements. So before we were all able to use cloth masks, you know, that was, you can have like these really cool, I know I have a bunch of Star Wars masks because I love Star Wars, but we now are hearing that we need to really shift that up to having surgical masks, medical grade masks. And so we really want to emphasize that those are the better protective masks, as well as particularly N95 or the KN95. So even especially when you're indoors, having those higher level grade masks are much more protective. And we have said to go away from using cloth masks and no longer using cloth masks. So we definitely encourage people to upgrade their cloth masks to those higher level ones. And I believe there's a lot of information going out about masks being available in different locations for free. So we'll try to link those resources to you all as we get more information. I'm sure most of you are probably getting information as well, but as we get that masking information of where they're available for free, we will definitely share that with you. Next slide. So I won't go into this. The quarantine guidance and the isolation guidance is very confusing. It's confusing to us. How do I even explain this to you all? I don't want to go in word for word. What Nancy did here on these 2 slides, slides 5 and 6, she basically broke it down by if you have symptoms, if you don't have symptoms, how your isolation should look, if you're vaccinated, if you're unvaccinated, what you should do. I'm not a physician, I'm not a medical physician, so I wouldn't want to try to provide you all any kind of information as to what you all should do if you have this X, Y, or Z, right? But we really try to hone in on just giving you the key pieces to our isolation and quarantine guidelines on these slides. And so I will leave this to you all so that I don't give you a headache tonight. It's already late for everyone. So we'll go to the next slide, Nancy. Thank you. So that's your quarantine guideline there. This is another resource I did want to hone in for you all is testing, right? Testing has been just crazy. My husband's a pediatrician, and all he talks about is with his patients, where to go get testing when you have to wait hours to do that, et cetera. So we really do want to bring in as much as we can as far as resources. So we did launch a testing program by providing residents a PCR test kit, and they can take it home, they do their test, and then they return it to our designated testing sites. So if you continue to hear from residents or clients, whatnot, as far as needing tests or not being able to access them, they are more than welcome to get them through our testing sites. And in spot 8, or not, well, our test kit pickup sites, and those are located at the Helen Keller Park, at Lenox Library, and Lawndale Library. So feel free to show your residents that direction, and they will be able to pick up their test kits there. As we again get more information or learn of any new resources, I will make sure that we share that with you all. But that's all I have for now. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any. I do have one though, Lindsay, if it's okay. I heard a friend of mine does, his business is all COVID, mostly for movie studios, Apple and the like. And obviously business has been really good from last year and a half. He was telling me that in several European countries, they've already ceased all their COVID protocols or in the process of doing so. So that's a good sign for us, isn't it, potentially?
Yes, I mean it is, but we also have to look at the metrics, right? So it's not like a one-stop kind of like what one does, everyone else can do. Some countries have probably less density, more people taking on the strategies of trying to be preventive in other ways. So we would have to look at all of that. But definitely, I think we are seeing things decreasing. So what we tend to see is, right, it's all coming from the east, right? So we've seen the East Coast numbers going down, so we can start thinking, okay, that'll be us soon. So we can definitely take all of those news that are coming out from other locations that have already dealt with this current epidemic, or this increase in the surge in cases, and say that, okay, we are going to hopefully be there very soon. And we are seeing that kind of dip down on our numbers. So we're hoping that we are now on our way down and hopefully can get back to taking out all of those other implementation strategies that we've had so that we can get back to a normal living that we all really want.
Great, encouraging. We'll give you credit once we get there by April 1st.
That's right. That's what I want to hear.
Okay, any other comments, questions? I think we're good. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for doing that so succinctly. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, we're on to transportation reports, Jackie.
Sorry, that's Steve Lance, and he's going to do both Metro and the Transportation Committee.
Oh, I am? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So let's start with Metro today. It was a 5.5-hour meeting, 3 hours of which was spent on the West Santa Ana branch. Bottom line, the West Santa Ana branch is going to be developed in 2 phases, one from Artesia in the southeast area up to the Blue Line. And then the second phase would take it from the Blue Line to downtown. So it's going to be built as a light rail line. They're looking to redo all the EIRs. They're going to try and get the first phase done by 2035, second phase by 2045. So this is not something you're going to see in construction in the next few days or in the next few years. But they have committed to have the project considered a complete project only when the entire 19-mile stretch from downtown to Artesia is done. Second thing that they dealt with was the status of electrification of the Silver Line, which they call the J Line. That project goes from El Monte to the Harbor Gateway Transit Center currently, and the line goes all the way down to San Pedro, but the electrification has not. They're looking now at extending the electrification all the way down to San Pedro. That was the direction from the board. There'll be a change order at the next meeting introduced by Supervisor Hahn. There's also another corridor called the Rail to Rail Active Transportation Corridor. That goes from basically along Florence or so, from Crenshaw east to the Harbor Subdivision south of downtown. That project was approved for a $115 million project for an active transportation corridor that's 10 miles long. The CEO was authorized to start the project. Basically, they said, go for it. They had found the money and they're going to go for it. There was also a report from the operations department on the temporary service reduction. As you may know, Metro is suffering from a need for 560 bus operators and 28 rail operators. They're short. just to operate the current service, which was reduced earlier this year. The cancellations have risen from 3% service cancellations to 17%. And so what they've had to do is start ordering callbacks where the operators are working 6 days a week and overtime just to provide the service that's on the street now. There was a big push to try and get Metro to go back to operating 7 million revenue service hours. But for the meantime, starting February 20th, they're going to reduce the frequency headways from 10 minutes to 15 minutes, meaning the bus will come every 15 minutes instead of every 10 minutes. And the trains are going to get reduced to a minimum 15-minute peak, just so they can improve the reliability. They have a goal of getting back in service, full service by June. There was a lot of skepticism as to whether that could be accomplished. Metro staff has a list of 4 different criteria that would need to be accomplished in order to get there. I won't go into the details, but bottom line, they want to report back every 30 days. And they want the data on where the cancellations are actually going to occur. There was some concern that the major service area is in the downtown South LA area and that all the service cuts would come from there. So they want to report back in 30 days on how they're going to manage equitably the reductions in service. Let's see, anything else on that? They also want to focus, a lot of the discussion was on the mental health of the operators and operator retention, operator recruitment. And so they're going to ask for reports back on both of those things. They are having a challenge because they're only paying their operators something like $17 an hour. They want to take it up to 19. And even if you made $19 an hour, you're not going to make it work. You're not above the poverty line. So there was an hour of public testimony on that. And I think that covers what happened today at the board.
So go on to Transportation Committee.
Now I have go on to something else and we'll come back. I have to go get the Transportation Committee agenda so I can talk about it.
Okay.
I can do it real quick if you'd like.
Oh,
Please.
sure.
Okay. Might as well have it open. So we had a presentation from Metro on their LIFE program, which is a low-income fare subsidy program. They're offering a 50% discount on passes between now and June. So if you're interested, you can sign up on Metro's website. We also talked about the Metro Golden Opportunity, which the letter was on the consent calendar. They're requesting funding from the state budget surplus to help accomplish some of the major projects and initiatives. And then we had just a brief update on the Measure R&M Metro budget request. We've looked at the applications and we'll be making a recommendation to the Transportation Committee in February, which will then go to the board in February. I think that was about it. It was a pretty brief meeting.
And in February, what you'll hear is that our Measure M program, if we allow funds, if we reserve funds for cost overruns and to complete the projects that we're only funding the early phases of, we've pretty well used up the Measure M money. Remember, we had already used up the Measure R money in the next through 2039. But I think that as we go forward, we'll be challenged to have another call for projects in the next year or the next 2 years as we have programs through this action tonight, funding that commits the entire available resources in the short term. So we may not have a call in September for additional new projects. We may just focus on delivering the current project and handling any overruns and completing the projects that we've started.
But we'll wait and see.
We'll see. Yeah, of course.
Okay. Jackie, what's next? Thank you.
Next is, and I don't know if you want to wait till the end on this, it's whether you want to meet in person, virtual, or hybrid. You want to go another month with virtual? Do you want to try to meet in person? Any changes?
I mean, I think we're so close, hopefully, we're close. I say maybe we go virtual one more time and plan on March.
Okay. Well, March is the General Assembly, so, yeah,
This would
so
be
the
April.
next meeting would be April, yeah.
I
So
mean,
for-
where the plan is for the General Assembly to be in person. which
Right.
If we do that, that's much riskier than this particular meeting.
Okay,
So, yeah,
so if there's no, yeah, if it's that, then we'll go virtual for February. Okay, so then Stacy is actually here to give the legislative report, except she's can't give it. She doesn't have the audio or something. So David is going to give the legislative
Okay, great.
report. David?
Sorry, there we go. Let me pull up my notes real quick. Okay, so the main one, just lost it. Minutes. There we go. Okay, so the committee had an update on the housing trust investigation that we've been doing. There's an item on the agenda today to talk about it more, but a subcommittee is going, hopefully will be formed of legislative committees members, COG legal counsel, and then some city managers who have finance and planning backgrounds to kind of go over all the options that are before us, because there are some important decisions to try and make, whether we want to do a land trust or a housing trust, or provide grants or provide lending. They have big impacts on the capacity of and whatever we would choose. So we want to kind of look into that more and hopefully get a recommendation to that'll come back to the board in the next couple months. The board also, the committee also voted to recommend sending a letter of opposition to the CPUC about the net metering decision that they were thinking about doing. Because of the timing of the CPUC's meeting, which would have been earlier today, the item went to steering committee, which was approved. We sent it in, and a couple days later, the CPUC withdrew their
They got our letter and that was it. Yeah.
Right. So we'll take credit for that. And we also recommended opposition to the I don't remember what the official title of it, the tax proposal. It was on the consent calendar. It's a competing initiative to Mayor Brand's Our Neighborhood Voices initiative that would essentially negate that that initiative if it was to pass.
It has a poison pill in it, which says that should this initiative pass and get more votes than the other initiative is null and void. So
Right.
we think that's the purpose of that initiative.
Yep. And I believe that was it on the, and then they talked about getting ready for the briefing, which already happened earlier this month. So I think that was it.
Well, there is an action item though, and the action
Yeah.
item is to form this subcommittee. It doesn't say that, I didn't write approve, but we would like to, they're recommending to the board that the subcommittee be formed. We do have several city managers that are on it. The city managers that have agreed so far are Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach, and Rancho Palos Verdes city managers to work with our legal counsel and interested members of the legislative committee. Any questions you might have, if you could send them to me or to David, we'll make sure that the committee looks into them. David said they're going to look at different models, but there's also decision as to whether we want to do this in the first place. Right. So we're going to look at what it means and different models, and we're going to use the legal counsel to help us. So if we can get your approval on that for a subcommittee.
Okay, anyone like to move approval of the subcommittee?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Chris. Thank you, Tanaka. Okay. Dave?
Sure. Any opposition? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
And I'm an interested member of the legislative committee. Just
Yeah.
wanted to put that out there while we're on the matter before we move on to something else. Thank you.
Yeah, you'll get a notice of the meeting.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, do you want to do the General Assembly?
Why don't you start and I'll fill in, Jackie? And there's been a lot of back and forth, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, okay, well, while I pull up my thing, Kim, do you want to talk about what, and I'm throwing this at Kim now, do you want to talk about sponsorships and some of the things, logistics that you're working on?
Sure. So sponsorships, we're doing well. We have 37,500 sponsorships. Our goal that's in our budget is 40,000, but we really want to hit 60. Of course, Jackie sent out to all of the elected officials where our sponsors were, who our past sponsors were, to ask for your help. You can follow up with any leads that you give to us. And if you haven't seen that email, reach out to us again, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of that. Also, we have our RSVPs. It's still very early. Chandler, actually, who's on the line here, is monitoring our RSVPs, and we're at 67 people actually registered for the event. So if you haven't registered, please go ahead and register. And we can also put, maybe David, you can put a link in the chat for the registration. We have met with the facility people. I think some of the elected officials here heard my report on that for the Carson staff. And they have voted, their city council has voted to have COVID tests done 72 hours prior to anybody entering for an event at the Carson Community Center. And my first thought was, at that time, right, we were in the heat of surge and nobody could get tests anywhere. Like, their appointments were all booked up for at least a couple of weeks. In-home tests were missing, not available on the shelves. So, so they are taking an item to their council to get a testing vendor hired. So we'll know more about that when that's finally approved, but they're doing a good job, I think, of trying to help people meet the requirements that they're putting into place. So that's happening. We're also talking with the caterer next week and what our food options look like. So that's kind of where we are right now. I don't know if you have any questions, or Jackie, if you have more to you want to know.
Well, I'm sorry, did you mention that we are going to follow any protocols that the Carson Community Center has for COVID?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And I mentioned the biggest one that's in place right now, which is the testing.
So as far as the program is going, I have to give full credit to Drew for having a whole bunch of friends, apparently, and we're getting some great speakers here. I think it's going to be really interesting. We have one government speaker right now, Juliet Hart, who was from the Office of Planning and Research, who I think maybe can react from the government perspective. But we have we have two panels right now. One is climate change and how private enterprise is adapting, and the other is community of innovation. These are working titles. We have confirmed Beyond Meat. I guess the CEO from Beyond Meat is on the
not CEO.
Not CEO. Oh
no, he's the chief scientist, though.
Oh, chief scientist. Okay, sorry. Okay. And then I know I have these somewhere else. Okay. And then on the other panel, we have someone from Up Ventures, someone from Starburst Accelerator, the CEO and co-founder of a firm called Boomerang. We have not decided, but I think he belongs here, the CEO of Charge Fuse. And then, and the idea is to have them give a little bit of brief about what they're talking about. Drew is going to moderate these panels, and we need more people for the first panel, and I think we've got about 4 or 5 already for the second panel. Then we would either have a third panel or a keynote. It hasn't been decided yet, and so I don't know, Drew, if you want to say more at this point.
No, I think it's good. We're still baking it to an extent, but we do have some, the speakers we do have are going to be really good.
And Natalie is going to give us all a big tug, because in mid-February, we always have a conference call with the speakers. We have to set that up. So we have to finalize everything in probably the next 2 weeks of who goes where and which panels and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yeah. So like the third, either like Jackie mentioned, we're either going to do another speaker panel for the third session, or we get a keynote. We're looking at both of those. So if there are any climate experts that you know that are either with private enterprise that are working on projects or products to address climate change, that would be great, particularly if we get some women speakers. We're a little bit heavy on the men at this point. We do have some females, but that would be good. And we have opportunities for, let's see, what else, Jackie? Is there anything else that we're looking for?
Well, I've made a request to the chief scientist of NASA to talk to us about climate change. I mean, chief scientist of not climate change at NASA. And we have a couple of other people that we're looking at. But we haven't, that's pretty much it. We have some outstanding possibilities.
Okay. Maybe I'll ask the group real quick. One of the ideas I had thrown out was knowing how important space and aerospace is to the South Bay. There is an opportunity for a panel just specifically on that. Is that something that would be of interest, do you think, for the cities in the COG, or is that a little too specific?
Well,
Crickets. Well, George says yes. He's got his thumb up. George came from aerospace, so I would
He has a
expect.
question. He has a question too.
Well, it also funds a lot of high-paying jobs, so we can afford to live here.
That's for sure. B, did you have a comment? No, okay.
George and Hildy have their hands up.
Oh, Hildy, sorry. Okay, we'll go to George and then Hildy.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. I just want clarification about the city of Carson's, that 72-hour testing. What I didn't hear was that's for those who are not vaccinated at all. Is that correct? Or is everybody blanket need to do a?
To everybody. It doesn't
Oh.
matter regardless of vaccination status.
Wow.
That's more stringent than the county rule, isn't it?
Yes, that's more stringent. There is county rules that deal with what they're considering mega events, but mega events start like at 500 attendees indoors. We're well under that. That is their council action for their facility.
And talk to Cedric.
Wow, the all 67 registered people know that.
We will be, one of the things we want you to register is that we will be sending out notices beforehand about what requirements will be. So it is important to register.
It's interesting because even schools aren't requiring testing of students, and they're congregating in massive, I don't know. Okay, so that could be a real problem for attendance. Hopefully they dial that back a bit before March.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. Okay, Hildy and then Olivia.
So I know we talked last time about attending remotely. And I think there was a cost associated with that made it difficult, or maybe it was technology. But I'm wondering, given that we know that there might be people that are hesitant to attend, but also that attending remotely has all sorts of benefits, although the networking value to this event is lacking there. But will we be providing any way that people can attend, can at least hear these panel discussions without having to be there in person?
We always have it up afterwards, but we're also putting that on the steering committee agenda for February 14th for them to make. We need to find out we're gonna have costs of what it would cost us to do that. So we're planning on what a hybrid might look like without committing to it at this point.
Great, thanks.
And Hildy, there's also a backup plan to do what Christian did. Christian and Jackie and the staff did a brilliant job last year. If you remember, it was all done. It was pre-recorded, but it felt as if you were actually there live.
Right.
I mean, I think the production value of that event could be a better alternative than if it's going to be like 80 people in a room because people have concerns either about the testing or whatever else. So unfortunately, we're going to have to see how this plays out, I think.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I think that either choice, there's a benefit to either choice, right? People that want to be there and network and be in person will come, but there are still people that have learned the benefit of being able to assess things remotely, and so we might want to really think about that.
Yeah, be on the steering committee. Okay, Olivia.
Thank you. So I wanted to drill down a little bit on what you said about the panelists. I think it's important for us to have the aerospace voice, because I think the South Bay cities are the hub of aerospace. And I think it's important to have that voice. I'm not certain whether we should have an entire panel on aerospace, but I think we should have someone from that field on one of the panels.
Oh, we do.
We actually, Olivia, we have Vandad Escobati is a principal of Starburst Accelerator, and they work with Raytheon, Northrop, Aerospace Corp, you name it, NASA. And then they basically partner the large corporations with smaller early stage companies, and they've done a lot. They're based in El Segundo. They've done a lot of good in terms of propagating aerospace and space. He's going to be there as well. Ben Marcus, who Jackie mentioned, is a principal with Up Ventures, and Up Ventures is all about innovation and venture capital investments in the transportation industry, which includes aerospace. And then we were talking about having potentially Melanie Strickland. I know I mentioned that one, Jackie, the CEO of Slingshot Aero.
Yeah.
She's awesome, former military, who's done really well with her firm, also venture backed. So we're going to have it represented under either climate or innovation.
And I think that would be sufficient. I don't think we need to have a separate panel on aerospace.
Okay, great. Thank you. Point taken.
Okay. Shall we move on then?
Yes, I think we're good.
Okay. Next is homeless services. And once again, Ronson has, in the middle of COVID, he was able to put on a fantastic event, our hygiene event. And we have a 2-minute video we'd like to show. Ronson, do you have it keyed up? Do you know? Okay, or Natalie, there we go.
Securian Financial is an insurance organization that does an annual conference. This year they're doing it in Rancho Palos Verdes at Terranea. And we were able to make contact with them. At each one of their conferences, they do a good deed. And this year, they're putting together 3,000 hygiene kits. And the South Bay Cities Council of Governments is very involved in homeless services. And we were able to work with them on helping them to assemble these 3,000 hygiene kits, which we're going to take and distribute to organizations throughout the South Bay that serve the homeless.
In the country, there's more than 500,000 people that are experiencing homelessness. And in Los Angeles County, we have a large number, 66,000 plus, just in Los Angeles County. So it's a big problem for us. And even in the South Bay, we have almost 5,000 people.
We're really excited about the opportunity today to give back to Los Angeles County.
We can provide the people that don't have homes with a care kit of things like toothbrush, toothpaste, other items that they can take care of themselves, and something to help them freshen them up and get them ready for a productive day.
The pandemic's definitely taught us it's not just about physical health anymore. You also got to think about mental health, and so we're also trying to lift people's spirits.
When an outreach worker sees a homeless person on the street, very often it's very hard for that person to make contact. When we can offer a hygiene kit and let them know that we're there to provide them something, I think it helps us make that connection, and that leads to the ability to help them with other things.
It shows the rest of us what we can do. And so we don't have to just sit around and say, hey, what could we do? There's so many things that we could do for people that are less fortunate than us. Well, I just want to say thank you to them for doing this today.
1, 2, 3, cheer for security!
It was a really great day, and today, I think it was, we received a thank you from Lila O'Meara, who I guess works for one of our cities. I can't remember.
Redondo Beach.
Redondo Beach. And she said, thank you to Lori Jacobs, but also David Legier for the South Bay Cities Council of Governments for blessing us with 100 hygiene kits for our unsheltered folks living in our streets. I especially love and appreciate the handwritten notes of encouragement in each kit. So it was just a great event all the way around. And so Dave, so Ronson, go ahead and give the rest of your report.
Great, thanks, Jackie. Good evening, everyone. And I also just want to mention that cargo van you saw in that video was actually driven by Lori Jacobs. So when I was out with COVID, sitting on my couch, Lori delivered 3,000 kits all throughout Los Angeles that went to Harbor Interfaith, Pat, St. Margaret's Center, and as well as like Downtown Women's Center and Skid Row and Safe Place for Youth in Venice Beach. So these kits were spread out wide and far and being used immediately. I haven't seen anyone deliver 3,000 hygiene kits in 2 days, but Lori did it. So big kudos to her. And also David really stepped up too. He moved like 60 heavy boxes that day, and just was really thankful. He helped me out. So it was great teamwork. So thanks, David. So then moving on to the updates, other updates, I just kind of want to start locally. On the Project Home Key front, as you recall, Project Home Key is converting motels to housing for people experiencing homelessness. We have four locations now in the South Bay: Inglewood, Redondo Beach, Carson, and San Pedro. We're also looking at 2 motels that are too small for Project Home Key. One's in Gardena, one's in San Pedro. I'm talking to like LASA and other service providers on what options we may have for those 2 motels. And then Providence Healthcare actually reached out to us last week. They're interested in actually building tiny homes somewhere in the northeast corner of the area. So like Inglewood, Hawthorne, Lenox, Gardena, that area. So we're just in very preliminary conversations with them. On the home share front, we've had 4 matches to date, and we've seen some pickup in activity from the PSA that we shot before the holiday break, and that's currently airing on, I guess, Cox and Spectrum. So that's good. Despite the Omicron, which might have muted maybe some of the success from the PSA, we're still seeing some uptake. So hopefully, as Omicron dies down, that will be even better performance. And Lori also did an advertising. She made an ad in the Easy Reader that came out January 13th for our home share. So we'll see how that pans out as well. We also have a Coral Fellow, kind of an intern for the next 3 weeks, named Marco Sanchez. He's going to be here. He's going to help us do something that is kind of surprisingly not available, and that is like a matrix of subsidies available for people experiencing homelessness. So these include things like Section 8 vouchers, general relief funds, food stamps, a whole host of subsidies that people can maybe apply for. And he's going to try and organize that in an easy to use format for folks to access to help those on the streets. And it can be used by our outreach workers, by our government officials, anyone who maybe is encountering someone that needs help. So he's going to put that together for us for the next 3 weeks. Lastly, on the Blue Ribbon Commission, which Christian Councilmember Horvath is serving on, some updates there. There's consensus now forming on several key points about the homelessness crisis. The commission, if you recall, was set up to evaluate LASA and the job it's doing and how it can maybe improve from a governance perspective. And the consensus right now is thinking that it's doing too much. And people after people coming in and speaking to the Blue Ribbon Commission is saying LASA is doing too much work. They're doing outreach work and housing work, but their main focus should be grant administration. And a lot of people would like to see them kind of go back to that, their bread and butter, versus being stretched so thin as they are now. Another point, and then we're seeing this from city after city coming in and speaking to the commission, is that there needs to be more funds being returned to the region for Measure H. That's a key theme. And also, beyond just LASA, there is a recognition that there's a lack of coordination between the county departments. So, primarily like Department of Mental Health, with LASA, DPH, there's all these gaps in the system, if you will, that need to be addressed. So even beyond LASA. So the thinking now is maybe there needs to be a new county entity or some other structure to be formed to kind of address those issues on a higher level, even above LASA. So yeah, that's it. That's my updates.
Thank you. If we can go to Kim to give a very brief update on the environmental programs.
Hey, great job, Jackie and John. Cameos in that video. Well done.
We're going to have to go get a SAG card or something, right, John?
Yeah, no, you guys are definitely.
Oh, I got mine right before that. You didn't get yours? You're in trouble.
Kim, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Well, after Wally's great presentation, I want to just, even though it's not thinking out of the box, all of our environmental services programs actually help your cities implement their climate action plan. So these are tried and true strategies, and the more you get involved in these programs, the more we can accomplish. We were able to do a really great job with the energy efficiency this year. We ended our partnership with the SoCal Gas Company, but we exceeded our goal. Our goal was to reduce 10,000 therms, and we reduced 10,000, almost 10,400, and that was in city facilities as well as South Bay School District. So that was great work. We do have a new program that's coming on board for energy efficiency, focusing on behavioral change for employees. And the SoCal REN is providing training. We can even do incentive programs and things like that, that your that we can coordinate with your city staff. And that's going to be available. We already gave a presentation to the Energy Management Working Group, who we've had some indication that we can follow up with individual meetings and set up something special for your city. It's really driven by what works best in your city. So that's exciting. And then on the rain barrels, is water savings also is really important. Chandler, who's also here today, they working with West Basin are delivering 1,200 rain barrels in the South Bay delivery program, and on top of 2 in-person events that are going to be coming up where they're going to be giving out more rain barrels. And so Chandler was really instrumental on managing all of those registrations and verifying all of those participants. And then the last thing I wanted to tell you is just sort of a reminder that we do have GIS services 20 hours a year free for any city that would like to take advantage of it. And recently we had the city of Gardena that reached out to us, and I thought this was really interesting and a way for you to think about this. They have hired a consultant to do some GIS work for them, but they're looking to us to help provide some of sort of that busy work to reduce that cost, that consultant cost. So if you have consultant contracts, you're looking for a very high specialized project on GIS, we can be available to you at no cost up to 20 hours to maybe reduce that consultant cost. So definitely reach out to us. And Chandler, maybe you can even put the link in the chat for everybody where they can go in and put their project in, and then we can evaluate how much time and resources it's going to take. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, Jackie. South Bay Fiber. You're muted, Jackie.
I didn't think I was. Okay, South Bay Fiber Network. We're having it's 2 fronts. We're working with our partner, American Dark Fiber, on opportunities to extend our network, and we're hoping within the next month or so we'll actually be able to come back and give you some hard information on this. It looks we're having a lot of special meetings on this. But also over and above that, Wally and I have been going to a lot of regional meetings. The region is looking at its structure of how the county is going to provide fiber, if we're going to, what our network means to that whole thing, how they can work with cities. And so there's an awful lot of regional meetings, and we're working with them on providing input in what we know from actually doing it on the ground. So we're very, very busy with fiber, but nothing much more than that to report. I can go on to the local travel network. On the local travel network, David and Aaron have been meeting with cities in our first corridors that we're looking at. And we're having a meeting in about a week or so to regroup and talk about where we are. And then we really want to bring it back to some of the elected officials in those areas to talk about what's happening in your cities and how we're going to make this local travel network come alive so that we can at least demonstrate it in several different places in the South Bay. So we're pretty excited about that. And we're working on an RFP for signage so that we can have a branded local travel network. I guess it's okay with you.
You want to talk about the legislation at this point?
Why don't you just?
Hey, Jackie, can I ask? We got like 6 minutes before we're supposed to be done.
Okay, I've got
to. Yeah, just can we get through as succinctly as possible, just to be respectful of everybody's time, please? Last few minutes.
I only have I have a couple of others, but we've got, David, do you want to just talk about our legislation and then we'll go to senior?
Yeah, sure. Assemblymember Gibson's office has offered to sponsor both of our pieces of legislation. One is the NEV plan that would allow us to use the terms NEV or neighborhood electric vehicles, et cetera, on signage or street markings for the project. And the other proposal is a rebate program for micromobility devices that are not e-bikes. And I had a couple conversations with legal counsel today, and they're marking it up and stuff. And so hopefully we'll we'll get some good news in the next couple of weeks that it's been introduced.
Okay, then senior services would be Britt or Ronson or both?
Yes, we met Tuesday, and we had a couple of very good speakers. We had the adult services librarian from the PV library, who gave us sort of an overview of their many services for seniors, as well as all ages, but in terms of their learning platforms and helping seniors become a little more tech savvy. And then we also had an update on our home sharing program from a representative from Silvernest, which was very helpful in terms of how they're trying to help recruit more homeowners to participate, because that's sort of one of the areas that they're having some problems with. I think maybe Ronson, do we have the clip of the media campaign video, or?
Oh, I don't know if we have enough time to show it, but I just really want to quickly just, the PSA, you mean, I think we showed that last time, right, Jackie? For the home share?
Yes, the home share we did, yes.
Yeah, but I just want to add really quickly, AARP is actually offering a grant. It's due in March, but if there's like a community garden you want to build for seniors, or a community center for seniors in your city, that's available. They just released it yesterday, the grant opportunity, and it's a very short turnaround. So I just want to get that out there.
In fact, can we send maybe out some information to our council members on that, just to kind of alert their staffs? Great.
Yeah, that would be great.
Oh, and then our next meeting will be Tuesday, March 22, and we will be working up another fabulous program, I'm sure.
Thank you, Britt. Thanks, Ronson. Okay.
The SPY working group didn't have a meeting, but Hildy, did you have anything you wanted to add? I don't think there's anything to add. Photo contest, as we've gotten this incredible response to our photo contest in the Daily Breeze and the Easy Reader and all this kind of stuff. We have, at last I checked, we had over 81 pictures, and we are going to plan, we haven't actually planned how we're going to process them. So we're going to be working with our officers. What we said is our officers will help us with the judging, and we're going to work that out. And the winners will be announced at the General Assembly. So this is our first photo contest. We're already getting comments about additional photo contests if we do them quarterly as we had thought. So you'll hear a lot more about that. It's exciting. People are very engaged in this. Opportunities to serve, there's an attachment there. There are certain seats that come up by law, the SCAG Regional Council seats, and those are the cities that Drew Boyles represents and that Mark Henderson represents. And those elections will be, those nominations will be open starting February 1st. Natalie will be sending out a flyer on that. Also, the Metro Service Council is up again, and we don't have an elected official on that Service Council, and we also have a vacancy. So I don't know if anybody's interested, but we do open it up to the entire world, and we hope to get a lot of applicants for that. And then there are other seats that do not have term limits, but the Council of Governments has a policy that every 2 years we open them up for anybody to apply if you're interested. So if you look at the attachment in your agenda, you'll see which seats are up, and I will also be sending that out the first week in February with the dates of when we're going to be making those selections. Now I'll turn to John Cruikshank about the Management Services Subcommittee. John?
All right, thank you. Late in the night for a heavy issue, but this is a very important issue. The board had recommended that a subcommittee be created called the Management Services Evaluation Subcommittee. It was myself and council members Suarez and Valentine. And we met a few times during December. And what we came up with is an evaluation form that would be used not just for Jackie, but actually Jackie and her entire organization. And the idea was, instead of just going straight out to an RFP to have a recompete for that position, or the management contract, that we'd actually go to all the board members and have them fill out an evaluation and have that compiled. And then we meet with Jackie. So there's, if you see in your board agenda packet on page 58, and I'm not going to read all the different things that we're asking to go through. Basically, what we would do is send out this evaluation form to every city and their board member and have that completed. And actually, one of the board members tonight had asked if we can, if you see there's a 1 week fuse, but she had asked if we could just do 2 weeks. And if you look at the recommendation, we're saying to have them back by February 15th. So that's actually a couple weeks anyhow. Jackie, would there be any issue in allowing people 2 weeks? And since we can get this out probably as early as tomorrow, correct?
We'll get it out tomorrow, and I think that fits with the subcommittee's work. That's really your call, I guess.
Okay, and I have no problem with it because I think it actually fits with the recommendation. So essentially, a form would go out to every city, the sitting board member. We would like each board member to evaluate Jackie Bacharach and Associates, obviously provide your scoring and any comments you have. That would be compiled by legal counsel. We would have a closed door. We'd give Jackie a chance to review those, our reviews, and then we would have a closed door evaluation with her to go over those comments, and then the board at that time would decide whether or not it's warranted to go out to an RFP or not. So that's the recommendation.
Great. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I think 2 weeks would be helpful for people to get it back. And because we want them to put a lot of thought into it. I think the notice should go out to encourage people to put in comments, because I think comments are always very helpful, and to add any areas that are not included in the evaluation, although it covers a lot of different areas. If someone thinks of something else, there is a portion I saw at the bottom that is allowed for other comments, but we should encourage people to address things that are not covered in the form and to put in comments.
Great. Any other comments or questions? So there's an action item here. I just want to, before we get to that, I want to thank Olivia, Bernadette, and John for working so hard on that. Great, very thorough process. Sorry for my teenage son in the background. Someone like to move approval?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Olivia. David?
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two others, and I think they're really important. One is, you know that you're paying an assessment for a regional planner, and Jonathan was here earlier. We're paying a fortune for him because he was coming through a consulting firm. We were able to bring him on as an employee. Next time you see him, he will be an employee February 3rd. And we can pay almost half of what we were paying before and get more of his time. The community development directors are really, you can ask your community development director, they're really utilizing his services, and he's really doing an incredible job. The one thing I wanted to bring to your attention is he has found from Northern California something called an ADU calculator. And this is something for your constituents. If somebody wants to build an ADU, they go on this website, which is the ADU calculator, and it tells them what your cities have to input into this. It tells them what your city codes are, what your city permit structure is, and gives them an idea. So it gives them enough information so that they can decide how cost effective an ADU would be to build in your city. The cities we were hoping to get, we needed a minimum of 5 for them to join in. And I should say, by the way, that this is paid for by the Jan Zuckerman Foundation. So it's actually free. We're not talking, the only thing is your city's time to put in their information, and then it's available to your constituents. We have 9 cities that have signed on. If I do not say your city's name, please go back and ask them to join. The cities that have joined are Hermosa Beach, Inglewood, Lomita, Manhattan Beach, Rancho Palos Verdes, Redondo Beach, Rolling Hills Estates, and Torrance. I think it's going to be a great I think we would probably be the only ones in Southern California. Jonathan found this for us, and it really is exciting. So it's not up yet because the city still have to input data, but I can give you a progress report on that. The last item I have is something that's going to actually come back next month, but I wanted to give you a heads up because you'll probably be hearing it in your council meetings. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with Alert South Bay. And Alert South Bay is this incredible program that puts out to your constituents notices when something's happening in the area. Every one of your cities had single contracts with Alert South Bay that are expiring at different times of year. And it was decided by the cities that they wanted to have a regional contract. And so city attorneys got involved. This has been going on for several months now. And the decision, I think, was finally made at the last meeting that if we're going to have a regional contract, the place to house that contract is with the COG. So Kim and I are working with the lawyers to figure out all of the contracts and all of the things that are needed. The one thing that we are using as our watchword is do not change a thing, because it's working beautifully and everybody loves it. But the whole organization will then come through the COG and the invoicing and everything. So if that's only if you approve. We're going to bring it to this more information to the steering committee, but we've got to move along pretty expeditiously. And what's happening is several city contracts are expiring. So you're going to be hearing this in your cities. And I want you to know that until the COG board approves of this, you guys next month, it doesn't matter what your city says. Any action you take in your city will be contingent upon the COG board accepting the responsibility. So that's in the works and it will come back next month.
Thank you. Olivia has a comment or question?
Yes, I wanted to ask you about the ADU calculator. Who should, if a city wants to be wants to get information on that, who should they contact?
It's Jonathan Bell, but if you don't, you can always contact Wally and I, and we'll get to Jonathan. Jonathan's not an employee yet, so he doesn't have a South Bay City's address. But
so I'll have my city manager contact you.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, that concludes my reports.
Okay, so any upcoming announcements or events?
There's in the chat, Sarah Patterson from SCAG wants to share something.
Okay.
Sarah, do you want to talk?
Hi, Jackie. Yeah, I was just putting it in the chat that SCAG opened up its scholarship opportunity for graduating high school seniors and community college students. So I'm putting the link in there to the application and to the flyer if you'd like to share it with any high school seniors or community college students that you think would like to apply. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Jackie, maybe we could forward that along with the other information we were talking about earlier to the councils. That'd be great.
If you can, David, if you can take it off the chat and forward it to the electeds.
And okay, well, we're adjourned. It's 8:08. We're 8 minutes over. However, this is the only meeting that we've run over for board of directors meetings, so we're still net ahead. I just wanted to point that out.
Mr. Chair,
You're
I just
doing a
want to.
good job, Drew. Don't worry about it.
I just want to say that when I look at all the things we're doing, it's absolutely amazing that we can get it all done in this amount of time because we're a busy group.
Staff's doing a great job. Thank you all. Have a great evening. We'll
Thank
see
you all.
soon.
Bye.